Welcome, everybody. It is so good to have you here today on this very, very beautiful day as we continue to talk about baggage. And as I begin this message today, let me begin with a quiz. It's a very simple quiz, just one simple question for you to answer. We've been talking about baggage, so here's the question. What is the most popular tourist destination in the United States? If you think you know the answer, turn to somebody next to you and tell them what the answer is. Every campus, go ahead and do that. If you're watching online, just write it down. Most popular tourist destination in the United States. What do you think it is? All right. If you said the Grand Canyon, you weren't right. But they do get a lot of visitors to the Grand Canyon. Over 4 million people every year visit the Grand Canyon. Probably some of you said the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World. And that's a better answer. Over 17 million people every year go to Disney World in Orlando, Florida. But the number one tourist destination in the United States is the Mall of America. The Mall of America. Now, Debbie and I years ago went to the Mall of America. It's the largest indoor shopping mall in the world. It's in Minneapolis, Minnesota. There are over 400 stores in this place, an indoor amusement park, full-size roller coaster. It is crazy. 40 million people every year go to that shopping mall. On any given week, there are people there from all 50 states in the United States. Number one tourist destination. And what does that tell us about the people of the United States of America? That one of our favorite things to do in our spare time is to buy stuff, right? And what's the number one way that we like to pay for the stuff that we buy? Credit, that's right. Because there are some things in life that money can't buy, but for everything else there's MasterCard. You've been thoroughly brainwashed, haven't you? Now, if you haven't been here before, if you haven't been here in a long time, you should know that this is week number 6 in this teaching series that we've entitled Baggage, and we've been talking about some of the stuff that we tend to pick up and carry with us through life. And so far we've talked about the baggage of guilt, the baggage of bitterness. We've talked about self-doubt. Last week we talked about the baggage of addiction. Today we are talking about the baggage of debt, and what we're talking about today is very, very practical, but it's also somewhat personal because we're talking about the way we use our money. And that's a very personal subject. And for some of you here today, I've already confirmed your worst suspicions because you're thinking, yeah, if I go to church, all they talk about in church is money. Not true. Come back next week. I'll prove it to you. But here's the good news. We don't want anything from you. This is not an ask. We're not going to take like a second offering at the end of the service. We're not trying to raise funds for anything. I don't want something from you today. I want something for you. And here's what I want for you. I want you to experience freedom. And it's not just me that wants that. If you're a follower of Christ, if you're one of God's children, He wants peace and freedom for every one of His people in every area of our lives, including this area of our lives. And sometimes, you know, when you talk about these very, very practical subjects, people come to church and they say, I prefer to come to church and hear about spiritual things. Let me tell you this, there is no subject in the Bible, or few subjects in the Bible, that are talked about more than this area of our lives, how we manage our money and our possessions. It's a very, very spiritual subject. And I don't want us to ever be the kind of church that loves to hear what the Bible says about heaven and about forgiveness or about the end times, but tries to ignore what the Bible says about this very practical area of our lives. And besides that, here's what I know about you. Statistically, in a room this size, there are many people who are carrying the baggage from financial decisions you made months ago or perhaps even years ago, and it is something you think about on a regular basis. And it weighs you down, and it's taking a toll in your personal life, in your marriage, and it's a part of the stress that you carry every day. And so if we don't talk about this, this would be like spiritual malpractice for me as a pastor to ignore this kind of baggage. So today we're going to talk about debt. Here's what we're not talking about. We're not talking about your mortgage. If you want to pay off your mortgage, that's great. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about business debt. I'm really not qualified to talk about business debt. What we want to talk about today is what is often called dumb debt, okay? That's consumer loans, car loans, credit cards, that sort of thing. Those things can easily and quickly become a ball and chain in our lives and keep us from being the people that God is calling us to be and just weigh us down with some much unneeded baggage. Now, it is really easy in our culture to get overextended financially. I mean, it is so easy. Think about this. I could walk into Best Buy tomorrow and sign my name and walk out with a home theater system. I could walk into a new car dealership and with nothing but a signature, I could drive away in a brand new vehicle. I mean, it is so easy and so painless in our culture to just accumulate a boatload of debt. Now, it wasn't always that way in our culture. In fact, there was a day when if you needed something, let's say a washing machine, you would go down to the appliance store and you would say something like this. You would say, you know what, I'd like to buy that washing machine, but I can't afford to. So I'm going to give you $15 and I'd like you to put that washing machine in your warehouse. And then I'm going to come next week and give you $15. And I'm going to give you $15 every week. And when I pay for the washing machine, then I'd like you to deliver that to my house. Now, if you're under like the age of 40, you have like no clue what I'm talking about. But if you remember that system, what was that system called? Do you remember what it was called? Layaway. Yeah. But here's the cool thing about layaway. When you made that last payment on that thing and brought it home, it was brand new. In our system today that we call credit, when you make the last payment on that thing, you don't even know where it is anymore. And like, I think I gave that away. I ate that. I mean, that's the kind of culture we live in today, instant gratification and a constant piling on of debt. And so we want to talk about that today, but I want to talk about really the heart issue behind it. Why is it that we do that? Why is it that we spend and borrow, get ourselves deeply in debt? What is the heart issue that drives us, not just individually, but even as a nation, to accumulate huge sums of debt? I'll tell you what the issue is. It's this. It's a lack of contentment. A lack of contentment is behind this drive within us to have more and to borrow to get more. Let me give you an idea that summarizes everything that we're going to talk about. This is a very, very important principle that I hope you'll remember. Not original with me, but I think it's profound. It is this. My standard of living does not determine the quality of my life. I want you to say that with me, and let's make that our collective confession, okay? On every campus, let's say this together. My standard of living does not determine the quality of my life. Now, I want you to understand that is a very countercultural message. Because every day, every advertisement is telling me just the opposite. That my quality of life depends on my standard of living. That if I can just eat better and dress better and live better and drive better, if I can buy that thing, if I can upgrade this thing, then my quality of life will improve. And that, my friends, is a lie. Those two things are not connected. In fact, some of you know this personally because your standard of living is higher than it's ever been, and you've sacrificed some of your quality of life. Because you got a nice house, and you got the new cars, and you got all the tech gadgets, but you are going crazy, and you're so busy, and there's conflict, and there's stress, because now you're just trying to keep up and pay all the bills that came with your standard of living. And so there's this lie in our culture that our standard of living will determine our quality of life, and that is just not true. In fact, some of the happiest people I've ever met are people who have very little and live very simple lives. So I want to unpack that principle today. My standard of living does not determine the quality of my life. And we'll talk about contentment. I'd like to focus on a passage of Scripture in 1 Timothy chapter 6. If you have a Bible, turn there, 1 Timothy 6. You can also take the note sheet out of the bulletin. That's the white bulletin insert. The passage is there as well. You'll see it on the side screens as well, so you can't escape it. And take some notes on that note sheet. And on the back, take some time this week to read those Scripture passages. 1 Timothy chapter 6 is, by the way, a letter as part of the Bible, but it was a letter that was written almost 2,000 years ago in the first century by a man named Paul. We know him as the Apostle Paul. Now, Paul was a very wealthy man, but he lost everything when he became a Christian. Because in his culture in that day, Christianity was essentially illegal, and so he died broke and in prison. But while he was there in prison, he wrote a bunch of letters, and in this particular letter, he was kind of coaching this young man, Timothy, from a distance. Timothy was a pastor in the city of Ephesus in the first century, which is modern-day Turkey. And so Paul writes this letter, and he's kind of leading him to be a leader. And he knows that in order for that church that Timothy leads to function well, they have to understand what it means for them to manage well their resources. And so he addresses the subject of contentment here in chapter 6. I love this passage. Come back to it about every 5 years. And I want to tell you 3 things that I think the church today needs. Today, the church, number 1, needs a reality check. In other words, we need to look beyond the hype, and we need to see the reality of this world and our stuff through the eyes of God. And let me give you 2 very, very important questions to ask yourself that will give you a reality check. Anytime you're struggling to find contentment, anytime you're about to make any kind of a significant purchase, I want you to ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, what is eternal? What is eternal? Verse 6, godliness with contentment is great gain. In other words, if you have godliness and contentment, you have great quality of life regardless of your standard of living. Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. You start life with nothing. You leave this world with nothing. Anything you enjoy in between is a gift. That means everything that we work so hard for and that we fight for and that we sacrifice for and go into debt for and all the stuff that we buy and store and clean and insure, all that stuff is absolutely temporary. And if you're a follower of Christ, you're going to spend eternity in heaven with Him someday. And at that moment, that new piece of technology that you're dying to get, that kitchen upgrade that you think you deserve, that new car that you're about to buy, how much is that going to matter at that point? Not at all. Now, does that mean we shouldn't have material possessions? No, it doesn't mean that. I've got material possessions. Does it mean we shouldn't enjoy our material possessions? No, it doesn't mean that. I enjoy my material possessions. But it does mean this: we'd better not obsess over them, and we'd better not sacrifice what is more important in our lives to get them, because quality of life and standard of living are not the same thing. And so you ask yourself, okay, in all of my life, what is eternal? And what's eternal is people and the Word of God. Second question, what is essential? Or to phrase it differently, what are my needs and what are my wants? Now, this may seem obvious, it may seem simplistic, but this is an area where we really get confused sometimes as Americans. We really get confused between what's a need and what's a want. And so if you want great clarity, there's wonderful clarity here in verse 8. He goes on to say this, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. So when it comes to what you really need, the list is pretty short. If you got food to eat, and as I look around the room, most of us are doing pretty well in that department. And if you've got clothes to wear, if you're sleeping indoors, you've got everything you need. That's all you need. Now, you may have a lot more, and you may want a lot more, but that's all you need. Now, my daughters would tell you that I remind them of this on a regular basis. I'm like almost fanatical about this. We'll be driving in the car, and one of them will say, hey, Dad, can we stop at Target? Can we stop at Rite Aid? Whatever, because I need blah, blah, blah. And almost every time I'll say, honey, do you need that or do you want that? And it drives them crazy. But I want to ask that question because as they grow up, I always want them to have real clarity between their needs and their wants. And the problem is I'm just as guilty of this as my kids. Like, I'll go into Target or I'll go into Home Depot looking for one thing, and I'll come out with 10 things. And you know how that works, don't you? Because you go in for one thing, and then you're walking down the aisles, and you see all this stuff that you need. And it's like, wow, I didn't even know they made that. Now that I know they made it, I need to have that. And we get very confused about our wants and our needs. In fact, I read a very interesting statistic this past week that last year when the iPhone 5 was released, and they sold like 12 million of those in the first month, when the iPhone 5 was released, do you know what percentage of people were upgrading? In other words, who had an iPhone 4 or an iPhone 4S, but that wasn't good enough because now there's an iPhone 5? 83% of purchases were upgrades. Because I only have the 4, I need the 5. You know, And we live in this world that constantly blurs the lines between what we need and what we want. And every advertisement we see on TV is telling us, you know what, you need this, and if you have this, you'll really be happy, you'll really be fulfilled. This will bring you ultimate joy. And as time goes by, we just keep redefining what our needs are. I reread a great book this past week, came across it a few years ago. The book is entitled The Progress Paradox: How Life Gets Better While People Feel Worse. And it's a very interesting book. It gives all kinds of statistics about how our lives have changed dramatically for the better in the last 100 years. For instance, at the beginning of the 20th century, the average American lifespan was 41 years. Now it's 77 years. In the 1940s, the average new American home was 1,100 square feet. Today it's 2,400 square feet. In 1890, less than 1% of American households earned the equivalent of $75,000 in today's dollars. Today, 23% of American households are at that point. And in summary, today the average American lives better than 99.4% of all the human beings who have ever lived. Now, how could we ever be discontent? But here's the paradox. Even though things are so much better for us, we don't feel any better. And here's how the author summarizes all this. He says, many aspects of our present-day life would strike our recent ancestors as nearly miraculous. Today, we live a long time in comfortable circumstances, enjoy goods and services in almost unlimited supply, and travel where we wish, quickly and cheaply. All told, your great-grandparents might say the contemporary United States is the realization of utopia. Yet far from feeling better about their lives, most Americans are feeling worse. The percentage of Americans who describe themselves as happy has not budged since 1950, even though the typical person's income has more than doubled. Depression is 10 times as prevalent today as it was a half century ago. Then he says this: we live in a favored age, yet do not feel favored. You know what he's saying? That it's a myth that raising your standard of living will ever raise your quality of life. And what the church needs today, the church just needs a reality check. And we need to ask ourselves all the time, okay, what's essential and what is eternal? Let me tell you the second thing all of us need, and I think the church desperately needs today, we need a wake-up call. We really do. Verses 9 and 10 here are a warning, powerful warning about the dangers of discontentment. And they describe here, and these couple of verses describe what happens when discontentment gets a hold on our hearts. Verse 9, it says, people who want to get rich, and I want you to notice, it doesn't say people who are rich, okay? There's nothing inherently wrong with wealth. When it's acquired appropriately and when it's handled wisely, wealth can be a good blessing. See, this verse is speaking of the issue of discontentment. People who want to get rich, people who are not content, people who just need a little bit higher standard of living, something a little bit nicer all the time. Here's the warning. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Now, notice, it doesn't say money is evil. Money is not evil. See, money can feed a hungry person. Money can give a home to a homeless person. Money can send an African child or a Haitian child to school. Here's what I've discovered about money. Money is an incredible servant, but it's a horrible God. It's an incredible servant, but a horrible God. And the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money, discontent, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. Now, there are some very strong words in those couple of verses. If you look back over verses 9 and 10, you see words like a trap, ruin and destruction, many griefs. Okay, this is a wake-up call that there are consequences to our personal and collective sense of discontentment. Let me tell you about 4 of the consequences. Let's start with the obvious one. Financial consequences. There are financial consequences to discontentment. In fact, I want to give you an example, and if you're in high school, or if you are in college, I want you to pay very close attention in the next 2 minutes, because statistics say that 75% of you will get your first credit card when you go to college in your freshman or sophomore year, okay? And even though you may be smart enough to get into college, you're not smart enough to read the fine print on a credit card. And even though in high school and college they're going to teach you all you need to know and more than you need to know about sex, they won't teach you anything about how to handle your money. And I don't want you to learn the hard way like I did, okay? So let's talk about financial consequences. Here's an example. Suppose you purchase $15,000 worth of furniture on a typical credit card. And that's the average amount that an American household with credit cards has on their credit cards right now today. Okay? And if you make only the minimum monthly payment required by the credit card company, how long will it take you to pay off the balance? Go ahead and just kind of venture a guess to yourself. I think, here's how long it'll take. 57 years is what it will take to pay that off. Okay, second question, the actual amount of money paid for that furniture over those 57 years would be, second question would be, how much would you pay totally? Here's the number, $58,392 for your couch. This is why they call it dumb debt. Because you would never pay that much for furniture, but you might pay that much over time if you get trapped in that cycle of what they call compounding interest. And the reason they call it compounding interest is because it pounds you and pounds you and pounds you month after month. Okay? Now you understand how that works. Those are the financial consequences. But here's what we need to understand about debt. It's not just a financial thing. It's not just about what's in your bank account. Because it will begin to affect every area of your life. Secondly, there are emotional consequences. If you're dealing with a lot of personal debt, I'll tell you what else you're dealing with. You're dealing with a lot of stress because you're trying to keep all the balls in the air and figure out which one to pay this month, and that just takes an emotional toll, and you can't be the person God called you to be. Third, there are relational consequences. I would say every married person in this room has had an argument over money. And when you got a lot of debt, the arguments just get more heated. And I see families all the time that are way overextended financially, and so both parents have to work long hours, and so they've got the nice house, they got the cars, but they're also lonely, and there's conflict, and there's tension, and there's relational consequences as well. This ripples into every part of our lives, and then there's spiritual consequences. Because if we're deeply in debt, we don't have the freedom to do what God calls us to do or go where God calls us to go. You know, you hear about a need in somebody's life, and you want to bless them, and you want to be generous with them, and your heart goes out to them, and God is saying to you, and your heart is saying to you, give, but Visa is saying to you, pay. And so you can't follow the prompting of God, or God may want you to go somewhere and serve in a different country, in a third world nation, maybe on some mission endeavor, but you can't go because of decisions you made months and years ago, and you're still carrying the baggage. Financial, emotional, relational, spiritual consequences. It's a wake-up call. We need a reality check. We need a wake-up call. And third, I think the church needs an attitude adjustment. We just need to have a different attitude toward possessions and money and eternity and what really matters. Let me skip down to verse 17. You can read the verses in between on your own. It says this, command those who are rich in this present world. I have to stop here because you're going to be tempted to tune me out in the next couple of minutes. Because you read that phrase, rich in this present world, and you say, oh, obviously that's not me. You ask any person on the street, are you rich? What are they going to say? No, I'm not rich, but so-and-so, they're rich. Because here's how we define rich. Anybody who has more than we do, they're rich, not me. So obviously, I don't need to read this part because this does not apply to me. Now, if you think this doesn't apply to you, I will give you an assignment. When you go home, you go on a website. This website is called globalrichlist.com. Fascinating website. Here's what you do. You go in, and then you plug in your annual income. You type that in, then you push a button, and it compares your income with the other 6 billion people who live on this planet. So I experimented with this. I punched in an annual income of $50,000. You might make that. You might make that as a household between two people. You may not make that, just an example. But if your income is $50,000 a year, let me tell you a little bit about how that compares globally. Your monthly income could pay the monthly salaries of 224 doctors in the country of Pakistan. It would take the average laborer in Zimbabwe 49 years to earn what you earn in a year. It takes you about 2 minutes to earn enough money to buy a can of soda. It takes the average worker in Ghana 9 hours to earn enough money to buy a can of soda. Now, aren't you feeling grateful? You're like, I'm rich. Honey, we're rich. Aren't we glad we went to church because I found out I'm rich? It's not what you're saying. Because we live in a culture that makes us feel as if, yeah, but it's not enough. And every so often, you know what we need to do? We just need to be reminded of how much we already have, because the message we hear every day from our culture is how much we don't have. So verse 17, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. In other words, don't look to your possessions and your money for security and significance. Enjoy your stuff, but don't worship it. And don't get arrogant, because whatever you have by the grace of God, because you're not that smart. There are smarter people than you who have less than you have. That's just what the Bible's saying. I'm just interpreting it for you. It says, command them to do good and to be rich in good deeds. In other words, maybe it could say this: if you want to overcome the discontentment in your heart, stop hanging out at the mall and start hanging out at the soup kitchen. Start hanging out at the rescue mission. Don't just be rich as an American, be rich in good deeds. Command them to do good, end of 18, be rich in good deeds and be generous and willing to share. In other words, instead of just trying to make more and spend more, why don't you try to give and make a difference in this world and use it to bless other people? Let me tell you what is being implied, if not overtly stated here in these verses, that it's okay to be discontent. You just got to be discontent with the wrong things, with the right things, because we're always discontent with the wrong things. So maybe instead of being discontent with what we don't have and all the stuff we want to have, we become discontent with the poverty in this world. We become discontent with the injustice we see in this world. We become discontent with the fact that God's kingdom is not advancing. And so in that discontentment, we allow that to drive us to be rich in good deeds and generous and willing to share. And you know what happens when you become rich in good deeds and when you become generous and willing to share? That begins to break the grip of discontentment on your heart. That begins to silence the voices of our culture. Makes us more grateful people. My daughter and I, my older daughter, had this experience last year when we went to the country of Haiti. We decided we wanted to do good and serve some other people. And we were there traveling through this country, surrounded by absolute poverty. Let me tell you some of the conversations that never happened while we were in Haiti. I never heard my daughter say, you know, Dad, when I get home, I think I need to upgrade my iPod because mine's 8 gig, and I think now they have 16 gig. Never came up. I never thought to myself, you know, when I get back home, I need to replace my Jeep because it's like 9 years old. Never thought that, because you know what? When you're serving people who have no indoor plumbing and no running water and have never been to a McDonald's restaurant in their lives, suddenly your perspective changes and your discontentment goes way, way down. But, you know, here's the problem. You know, I come back to the United States and that all vanishes so quickly. And a few years ago, I decided to do something. I carry this in my wallet now. This is 200 Kenyan shillings, okay? In the country of Kenya, 200 shillings is equal about $2.50 in American currency. And I brought this back with me. I was in Kenya about 4 years ago, again with my older daughter, and ever since then I carry this with me in my wallet. And I carry this because it reminds me of a conversation I had while I was in Kenya with a young man by the name of Daniel. Daniel was a great young guy, had a real heart for God, and he served in his church there, working with the youth group, with the teenagers. And he really wanted to just be a pastor full-time, but the church couldn't pay him. So he drove, and probably still drives, a taxi. That was his job, which is a very dangerous job in the country of Kenya. This is what he makes every day, 200 shillings. And so when I came home, I started carrying this with me because I just wanted to have a reminder with me all the time that there's a young man in Kenya who would love to do what I do and get paid for it. But he can't. So he drives a taxi, and he gets paid every day about what I spend on a cup of coffee. And whenever I look at that and I remember my time there, you know what? It just changes my attitude a little bit, and I become less and less preoccupied with what I don't have, and I think more and more about what other people don't have. And you know, when you become rich in good deeds, you become generous and willing to share. Let me tell you what, it's going to change your perspective. You're going to have an attitude adjustment, because you're going to get outside of yourself, and suddenly it's not going to be about me, about me, about me. It's going to be about this world, and we're going to start to see this world through the eyes of God, and that will change us completely. And I'll guarantee you won't have problems then with discontentment. Verse 19, here's a great promise. Here's how it wraps up. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. And I love that last phrase, life that is truly life. It is such a powerful phrase, especially for us Americans, because we're surrounded every day with voices that tell us, you can have life that is truly life. It's just one purchase away. For just $12.99 a month, you can have this thing that will really make your life worth living. But that's a lie. And I'll tell you this, if you spend your entire life in the pursuit of more and better and shinier, and then just spend the rest of your life after that making the payments, that's not life. That's not life that is truly life. Life that is truly life is a life that is lived for something bigger than all the shiny stuff of this world. Because here's the thing, your standard of living will never determine the quality of your life. So let me give you a very simple step to take in response to what you've heard today. There are probably a couple things on the back of the note sheet that I would encourage you to do, but number one thing I would encourage you to do is this. There's a class that we offer twice a year. It's called Financial Peace. It features a guy named Dave Ramsey. You may have heard of him. He has a radio talk show. It's a 9-week class on how to become a better manager of your finances. It's very, very practical. We've had a number of families in the church take this class, and they have found it extremely helpful. And I'll tell you right up front, we don't make any money from this. We're not going to sell you a subscription to something. We don't want something from you. We want something for you. We want you to experience peace and freedom. I was talking to the guys who lead this class. They actually sent me an email a few weeks ago. And I want to share this with you. We had 14 couples, 14 families in this last class of Financial Peace. We offer it in the fall and in the spring. And they wrapped up a few weeks ago. There were 14 families in there. And over the 9 weeks of that class, they collectively paid down debt, consumer debt, dumb debt. They paid down over $90,000 worth of debt. In 9 weeks, 14 families, more than $6,000 apiece. It's amazing what happens in that class. And I would just implore you, if you've never taken this and you have any kind of financial struggles with management, great opportunity for you. Here's how you can find out more about it. Out in the lobby, there's a place where you can sign up to show your interest and say, hey, I'd love to be a part of this class when it starts again in September. Here's my name, here's my phone number, here's my email, get in touch with me. If you attend the Clark Summit campus, when you leave today, go out in the lobby, look for Steve and Jenny Mann. You can't miss Steve. He's a really big guy because he literally is a world champion weightlifter. So you won't want to arm wrestle him, but you will want to talk to him about financial peace. If you attend the Dixon City campus, see Dave Kutch. Dave is in the sound booth today. He'll step out. He'll meet you out there at the table. And we're going to give you a gift. If you sign up today, we will give you a book. The book is entitled Managing God's Money. You can read that book this summer. That will give you a head start on the class. And then you can jump in September. So that's what I would encourage you to do to get rid of the baggage that we've been talking about today. And I want you to imagine something. Imagine what could happen if every person who calls Parker Hill Community Church their home were to get serious about this. And if we were together to make a commitment in the next few years to just get rid of the baggage of our debt, what would that do for our families? What would that do for marriages? What would that do for your stress level and your schedule? And what could we accomplish together for the kingdom if we got serious about this? Because this is something that God cares deeply about, and I do too, because I don't want you to live with a constant sense of discontentment and create all kinds of baggage that you're going to have to live with, because contentment is a great thing. And the standard of living you pursue will never determine the quality of your life. All right, next week we're going to wrap up this series. Mother's Day weekend next weekend, we got something really great planned for you. So make sure you come back, bring mom with you as well. I think it's going to be encouragement to her and a blessing to her. And then take her out to lunch, okay? So we'll see you next week. Let's stand together. The campus pastor is going to come and close in prayer.